page 36 in the Chayenu, 29th of Adar. Now we are continuing Perek Lamed Gimel, chapter 33, celebrating joyously God's unity, continuing the theme of earlier chapters of how one should be joyous at all times, regardless of circumstances. The Tanya now enlightens us on how the meditation on the oneness of Hashem, of Hashem's existence, and the implication thereof, enjoying a personal intimacy with the King, is the surest way of rising above all challenges. So again, enjoying a personal intimacy with the King is the surest way of rising above all challenges. In chapter 31, the Alter Rebbe discussed various means of arousing joy to counteract the sadness brought on by contemplations of one's spiritual failing. Chapter 33 resume this discussion. In general, we know that if you can have within your character trait, if you can pinpoint which one could lead you to the most, which character or character trait you can possess that would give you the utmost success, it's simcha, is joy. Sadness will do exactly the opposite. Simcha can lead you to the heights of your career, of your marriage, of anything in life, if you always have simcha. And that tells us to, obviously Alter Rebbe will tell us how intellectually we can get to it, how we can, we know how to argue back intellectually, intelligently to respond to the evil inclination with different challenges that comes to us, that will be able to respond and remain in a joyous mood and with simcha. Yet another means of leading one's soul to true joy, especially at those specific times when one finds it necessary to purify his soul and illuminate it with a gladness of heart. Let him then think deeply and picture in his intellect and understanding the subject of God's true unity. True unity means not only that there is but one God. What does it mean, the unity of Hashem? Not only that there is but one God, one Creator, but that furthermore, God is the only existing being. Nothing truly exists outside of Him, as will be explained further. I have to think about it. What does it mean nothing really exists beside Hashem? Because anything, when we say Edom Eino Ed Milvado, what does that mean? There's nothing but Hashem. Nothing exists but Hashem. Meaning that everything else is dependent on God. He is the only entity that is independent. Let him consider how he permeates all worlds, both upper and lower, just as the soul pervades the body, thereby animating it, so does God permeates all the worlds. Let him further consider how even this world is filled with His glory. This refers to the divine life force, which encompasses all worlds and which animates them, as if from above, without adapting itself to the particular nature of each created being. That's really what we say, Ora Soiviv. It doesn't adapt itself. So even this physical world is filled with His glory, the encompassing light of Hashem. And how everything is of no reality, whatever in His presence. והוא לבד, הוא בעליון ותחתונים ממש כמו שהוא לבד, קודם ששת מבראשית, וגם מוקם הזה שנברא בו העולם הזה, השמיים והארץ וכל צבאם, היה הוא לבד ממלא המוקם הזה. He is one alone in the upper and lower realms, just as he was alone prior to the 6 days of creation, when nothing existed apart from God. So too now, when all the worlds have come into being, he is still one alone, since all of creation is not before him. As will be explained further, even in the very place where this world, the heaven, the earth, and all their host was created, he alone then filled this space. וגם עתה כן הוא לבדו בלי שום שינוי כלל, מפני שכל הנברואים בתלם הזה ובמציאות ממש. The same is true now. He is one alone without any change whatever or whatsoever. For in relation to him, the very existence of all created beings is utterly nullified, so that from his perspective, as it were, everything remains just as it was prior to creation. The Alter Rebbe here introduces an analogy which traces the early evolution of an idea or a desire from the moment that it first occurs in one's mind and heart. At that stage, the idea or desire is formless, not yet having the shape or form of words. It is pure desire, pure idea. The desire of an English speaking person, for example, feels no different from that of a Hebrew speaker. Make a difference what language you have, you might still have the same desire. It tells us that if you can attract or promote a desire, it's universal. You're not just coming into one market, you're hitting mass market, because you're not talking to their habits, talking to their culture, you're talking to something very basic. If we know what it is and pinpoint that specific thing, it is only when it reaches the stage of applied or particular thought, practical thought, that the idea or desire takes on the form of what are called letters of thought, which may later be expressed in speech. So once it's expressed, the Frenchman will express his desire for the croissant different than the American. The American will say, "Pass me the bun," and the Frenchman will maybe talk for 2 minutes to say what he wants. Who knows? But the desire is still the same. Right. Now, the letters of thoughts and speech are, of course, seminally contained in the original idea or desire. It is only that at that point their existence is completely nullified. It is as though these letters were non-existent. Only the idea or desire is felt. To relate the analogy to the point under discussion, why is it telling us that there's a point of desire where it's all the same? The seminal point where it's formless. Every created being derives its existence and life from divine speech. The letters of God's command that created it, since nothing is outside God, this creative speech and the beings created thereby are contained within God. In the same way as the words one speaks were previously contained, the words that you speak were previously contained within your mind. Previously contained within the desire of the heart, all of creation is therefore nullified before God, just as the letters of speech are nullified within the idea or desire, which is their source, where only the desire is felt, not the letters. And in the Alter Rebbe's words, "Kevitu loisis hadibur v'amachshov v'mekirim v'shoshu ma'us hanefesh v'atzmuso shehein eser b'chinoisei chochma bina v'das." All created beings are nullified before God. Just as the letters of speech and thought are nullified within their source and root, the soul's substance and essence, meaning its 10 faculties, Chochmah, Binah, Das, and the Midos, and the emotional faculties, she'ein b'hem b'chinas oisios adayin kodem shemislabshus v'levush ha'machshava, v'shezbor prokim chaf v'chafalev barichus ha'nsham, in which there are no letters as yet, prior to their being closed in the garments of thought, as has been explained in length in chapter 20 and chapter 21. Elsewhere, this idea is further illustrated by an analogy from a physical phenomenon, the nullification of the sun's radiance and light within its source, the celestial orb of the sun. Shegam shomeiru mispashtus vadai zivo ve'ero v'yesel says mispashtus ve'oros v'chalal ha'olam ela shesho muboter b'metzius v'mekeru chilo eino b'metzius klal. For surely its radiance and light glow and spread forth thereto, more strongly, in fact, than they spread forth and glow in the space of the universe. Being close to its source, the light is more intense. But there, within the sun, its very existence is nullified within that of its source, as it is as though the light were absolutely non-existent. And the closer you get to the sun, the more you become nullified to it. And when you're in the sun, you're completely nullified. You have power. You have the power of light. You have the power of the sun. But as if you're non-existent. All that is seen within the sun is the sun itself, not the light, which is merely a product and offshoot of the sun. This will be better understood in terms of the saying of what good is a candle in the daylight. What can I do with the candle during daytime?
The same thing also. What can you do with a flash in front of the sun?
Exactly. Naturally, the candle is no less luminous by day than by night. It's doing the same job by day and by night. But because its light is overwhelmed by the far greater brightness of daylight, it no longer fulfills its function of illumination. At this point, it ceases to exist as a luminary. The same is true of the sun's rays as they are within the sun. Exactly so, figuratively speaking, obviously, is the very existence of the world and everything in it nullified in relation to its source, which is the light of Ein Sof, as is explained there at length. This then is the true meaning of God's unity, that He alone exists, and there is nothing beside Him. Now, when one contemplates deeply and at length on this matter of God's true unity, his heart will rejoice with this faith. His soul will be gladdened by it, to the point of rejoicing and singing with all his heart, soul, and might. For this faith is tremendous. When it fills one's mind, it actually constitutes an experience of closeness of God. This, in fact, is the whole purpose of man, and the purpose for which he and all the worlds, both upper and lower, were created. For what? That God should have such a dwelling place here below, as will be explained further at length. How this earthly abode for God is the purpose of all creation. Men's faith in the unity of God fulfills this goal. For when God's unity is revealed in the mind and heart of man, this world becomes an abode for God. He is revealed there just as one reveals himself completely in his own home. So how great is the joy of a common and lowly person when he is brought close to a king of flesh and blood, who furthermore larger and greater still dwells together with him, not in the king's palace, but in the commoner's home. Imagine a simpleton, and the king comes to visit him. The king stays in his house. How much honor, how much joy he has. How much more, infinitely more, ought one to rejoice in the nearness of the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He, and in His dwelling together with men in this physical world, man's home. So it is written in Yirmiyah, for who is the man who dares to approach me, says God. Yet in one's awareness of God's unity and through self-nullification before Him, one does come near to God. Furthermore, God thereby dwells with him and within him. For this ability to experience and to be absorbed in God's unity, it was instituted by the sages that one should render praise and thanks to God and thanks to God's name each morning, saying, Ashreinu matev chelkeinu v'chulu umayofi rushaseinu. How fortunate are we, how good is our portion, how pleasant our lot, and how beautiful our heritage. Klema, in other words, just as a person rejoices and is glad when an immense fortune falls into his possession by inheritance through no toil of his own. There is no toil. It's like winning the lottery. You didn't do anything. You bought a ticket for $1. Actually, some say that a lot of people lose everything they had when they win the lottery. They become miserable. Some say the reason is because they will never experience the same joy they experienced when they heard the news. So imagine the type of joy that a person has, $300 million. He looks at it, that ecstasy, that joy. He will never, anything he's going to do bungee jumping, jump off the plane. It's never going to be the same joy of reading that.
I'm a Jewish
guy.
I can handle it and build a show.
So there's always going to be some kind of a search and trying to get there. I mean, I never had the experience, unfortunately, but but that's why I was told it's such intense moment. Yeah, they can never be duplicated. Imagine somebody gets to a point where nothing excites him. He got so excited, and so any other excitement has never come close to that excitement. So everything that he will ever experience falls short of that excitement. So he can have a very miserable life. You understand?
It shouldn't be so lucky.
But statistic doesn't lie, You see people that...
everyone's got their service, the things they're going to do. For that person, they got to deal on scaling down. But
think how much joy you can bring to other people. You can do it for charity.
Right. Those who don't know, you
should be so lucky to have that problem,
Yeah.
So it's important to see Hashem as that, even more than that.
One thing we know, that if Hashem gives somebody the test, he should be able to to handle it. It might not be easy, but you should be able. They say that the test of the wealthy is harder than the test of the poor. Similarly and infinitely more, so ought we to rejoice over the inheritance which our forefathers bequeathed to us. הוא ייחוד ההוויה האמיתי אשר אפילו בארץ מתחת אין עוד מלבד וזאת דירוסו בתחתונים. This inheritance is the true unity of God, that even here below on earth there is nothing else beside Him alone. And this is His abode amongst the lowly beings of this physical world, when they are pervaded by the awareness of God's unity and nullify themselves before it. Rabbi said that 613 commandments were given to the Jews. The prophet Chavakuk came, and he based them all on a single one. What is the mitzvah? 613. Based them all on a single one, which is faith. As it is written, a tzaddik b'emunah yichyeh, a tzaddik lives by his faith. Gemara in Tractate Makos. Kleimar kilu eino rak mitzvah achas ye'emunah levado k'al de'emunah levado yovel l'kiyum kol tarek mitzvah. He said, really, you have 613 mitzvahs. So what does it mean? Chavakuk comes and says you only have one mitzvah. Emidon alachas. He based all the mitzvahs on one mitzvah. He said, what is the mitzvah? Faith. Because if you have faith, you're going to do the 613. So it's really based on one. That's the foundation. Dainu, but it's not sufficient to have faith. You have to also be joyful. It says, Dainu, כשיהיה ליבו יסוס ושמח באמונוסי בייחוד הוויה, תכלס השמחו כאילו לא יהויסו עולב רק מצווה זו לבדו. ולבד תכלס בריאוסוי ובריאס כל האלומיס. That is, when his heart will rejoice and be glad with his faith in God's unity, in perfect joy, as though he were obligated by just this one mitzvah, and it alone were the purpose for which he and all the worlds were created. Surely, if there were but one such mitzvah for him to do, he would fulfill it with the utmost joy. תסער לנפשו למיילו מיילו, הכל המיינים קיום כל התרי"ג מצוות מבייס ומחוץ. Let him thus rejoice in the mitzvah of faith, and by the power and vitality of his soul, generated from this great joy, his soul will soar far above all obstacles, hindering his fulfillment of all the 630 mitzvahs, both obstacles from within, from one's animal soul, or from without, arising from one's environment. Being thus imbued with the awareness of God's true unity, he will be able to overcome any obstacle hindering him from carrying out the mitzvahs. So just one thing we have to keep in mind, God's unity. He said, being thus imbued with the awareness of God's true unity, he will be able to overcome any obstacle hindering him from carrying out the mitzvahs. For how can anything stand in the path of God's will, the mitzvahs, when there is nothing in the world apart from God? The expression Yichye will live in the verse, a tzaddik will live by his faith, is meant in the sense of will be revived as though resurrected from the dead, so will his soul be revived by this great joy. This is double and redoubled joy, apart from the soul's joy upon apprehending how near God is to him and how he dwells together with him. He will also rejoice doubly in the joy and pleasure which his faith brings to God. For thereby, through one's faith in God's unity, the Sitra Achra is truly subdued, and darkness is transformed into light. Simcha Savaya, that's it. All you have to do is have Simcha. Listen to what it says. He will also rejoice doubly in the joy and pleasure which his faith brings to God. And what happened? For thereby, the Sitra Achra is truly subdued, and darkness is transformed into light. Meaning, the darkness of the clippers of this corporal world, which obscure and conceal God's light. Ad es kates k'mashakosu kates som lachoshech. It's written in Eov. Until the end of days, as it is written, he sets an end to darkness. There is an end to darkness. Dainu ketz hayomin shiyaviru achatum min oretz v'nigla kvei davai v'ru chol bosor yachdu k'mo shizbor lekaman. The biblical phrase, the end of days, is written ketz hayomin. Since yomin means days, and yamin means right. One is with a commas under the yud, yomin, meaning days in Aramaic, means days, and yamin means right. The phrase thus intimates that in the end of days, God will reveal his right hand, a reference to his attribute of revelation, when he will banish the spirit of impurity from the earth, and God's glory, the godliness within every created being will be revealed, and the flesh and all flesh together will behold it. That is to say, not only the mind, but even the very flesh of man will perceive godliness, as will be explained further. This is especially so in the diaspora. Eretz Amim, where the atmosphere is unclean and is filled with klippos and sitra achra. There is no greater joy for God than the light and joy caused by transforming darkness into light. When the light has the superior quality acquired by coming out of the very darkness. When a Jew in the diaspora is pervaded with an awareness of God's unity, his joy is all the greater. It follows too that the more lowly is one's spiritual position, the greater the divine joy when he acquires an awareness of God's unity. That's why education is so important. Someone is far away. What does it tell you? That, listen carefully to this point. It says, it follows too that the more lowly is one's spiritual position, the greater the divine joy when he acquires an awareness of God's unity. We have seen so far then that one's faith in God's unity leads him to a twofold joy. Joy in his closeness to God, and joy in the knowledge that his faith brings joy to God. Joy in his closeness to God, and the joy that his knowledge, that what he knows, brings joy to God himself. This is the meaning of the verse, let Israel rejoice in its maker. Note the expression maker, not creator or the like. Pirush. Why does it say maker? שכל מישהו מזרע ישראל שישמח בשמחת הוויה, שסוז ושמח בדירות ובתחתינים, שבחינת הציור גשמיס ממש. Whoever is of the seed of Israel ought to rejoice in the joy of God, who is happy and joyous with his abode amongst the creatures of the lower spheres, who are on the level of actual physical Asiya. The word translated in its maker shares a common root with Asiya. Be'osav, Asiya is the same root, the lowest level of creation. With this abode in particular, ought Israel rejoice, knowing that God's joy is especially great when the creations in Asiya, the very lowest world, become an abode for Him. For this reason, the plural form be'osav is used. The literal meaning of the verse is, let Israel rejoice in its makers. Why the use of a plural expression is in reference to God? This plural expression, makers, refers to our physical world that is filled with klippos and sitracha, which are called a public domain, a domain of multiplicity and mountains of separation. In that they are arrogant and separate from one another, God's joy in the fusion of this plurality is aroused when through this faith in God's unity, they, the klippos, are transformed into light and they become a private domain, unified realm for God's unity. And that's the Tanya for today.